Hello, I'm going to recap some hazards associated with composting and making liquid teas, liquid feeds today. So recapping the hazards obviously goes hand in hand with the PPE that you would wear, the personal protective equipment. So let's start with our compost heap area. Whenever you're gardening, you're going to be working with tools, with points and sharp implements and things like that. So I would say to everybody, if you're gardening, practical gardening, wear steel toe cap boots. Correct PPE on your feet, right? Make a point of doing that. There's some wonderful, comfortable shoes and boots on the market with steel toe caps in them. If you can look for ones that have a plate in the bottom of your foot like these ones do, even if you stand on an upturned nail, it won't go through. So you've actually got reinforcement from underneath as well. So to me, that's a real fundamental part of gardening safely. Compost is heavy stuff, so even if you've got your boots on, you need to look and think about yourselves. It is wonderful when you first make your own garden compost. Look at that, absolutely beautiful, isn't this? This should have been used by now this season, but we haven't been in the garden as much as we would have liked to have been. But amazing stuff, but it's heavy. So whenever we're working with compost and heavy materials in the garden, we need to look after ourselves. Don't overload wheelbarrows. Pack a wheelbarrow safely, balanced for you, what you can manage. If you're going to be shoveling or using a spade, put what you can manage onto a shovel. Only lift up what you can manage with the spade. You're gardening for you. So manual handling, compost is heavy. You need to look after yourself. So that's a couple of risks associated with composting. But if we come along onto this side to actually look at our active compost heap that we're still adding to at the moment, this involves needing to be turned. It's full, it needs to be turned now. Turning a compost heap again is heavy business. You need your steel toe cap boots on and you need to look after yourself. But we've had some really dry weather. Now, compost heaps, they do have bacteria in there and fungi that are rotting them down. They occur naturally, but if we breathe them in as dust, they do us harm. So if you are planning to turn your compost heap on a dry day, damp it down with a watering can or a hose pipe first to avoid the presence of dust. But if you still can't guarantee to avoid the presence of dust, you really should be wearing a dust mask when you turn. We as humans are designed to breathe clean air, so we've got some disposable dust masks there. Now these are quite comfy to wear, the disposable ones. So if you can't eliminate the dust as a problem, wear a dust mask. It is important to do so. Okay, so you can have dust as a problem within the compost heap. What other problems have we got? Well, when you're gathering up your plant material to add to the compost heap, comfrey, for example, is a wonderful addition to the compost heap, but it has fine irritant hairs on there. So we need to be wearing really good gloves to protect ourselves and keeping our skin covered. You're obviously going to find the odd nettle while you're weeding as well, and nettles are high in nitrogen and brilliant for the compost heap. Without the roots, because the perennials they can thing, but the top is a great addition, but they're going to sting us. So look, I've got some really good hearty gloves on there. I'm wearing good PPE and I'm safe from my plant materials. Other things that can get in there and cause us problems and we have to be aware of and dress for are our foreign objects. Not only might we end up with a spiny piece of thorn that we've ended up with in the compost heap that can puncture us and prickle us. This is a classic, is your broken glass. So always wear good, sturdy gloves. Broken glass can get into the soil, can therefore end up into the compost heap. Bits of pots are surprising when you come across them. They can cut. Old tin cans, Coke cans that have been trimmed through and things like that, and bits of wire. So potential there for puncture wounds, cuts, and so on that can then become infected. So do wear good gloves. Also, when we're collecting up material to put in the compost heap, we have that potential for getting in among animal feces, cats that have pooed in the garden, dog muck and so on. So we need to be aware that there's potentially there diseases that we can get on our hands. So again, wear gloves, practice good hygiene, because the health problems associated with animal feces are one problem that we can add to the compost heap, but the other sad fact is that our compost heaps can sometimes attract rodents such as mice and rats. So although we're not putting on any cooked food or anything like that that would attract them, it's actually quite a nice environment for them. So if they are in the garden area, they're likely to have passed through. There's likely to be vermin, urine in there and the associated diseases that we can catch. So wear gloves, be aware of that, practice good hygiene, wash hands before you eat, don't suck your thumb while you're gardening, that kind of thing. Just be sensible and look after yourself. So that's a quick recap on our 5 hazards of the compost heap and what kit, what PPE we should be thinking about wearing and making sure we have to hand if suddenly we need it. I'm going to go quietly over to this area to have a look at the compost teas that Louise made. Ooh, was it in April she made them?
I think it was.
Yeah, it was in April. So Louise was making our comfrey tea and nettle tea. So I thought I was going to use some of these today, that I would recap some of the hazards and what you should be wearing when you use these. Because when we are making our liquid feeds, they might sound lovely and organic and they do save you a fortune and do fantastic things, but they are still basically a chemical and we need to think of them accordingly. So when Louise was harvesting her comfrey and her nettles, she had to wear good PPE, cover her arms, keep gloves on, because the comfrey has the irritant hairs and the nettles have the stinging hairs, so she had to dress appropriately for that. But what about coming to use them? Well, there's a few hazards associated with them. As with any chemical, we need to keep it in bottles that are labelled, because it hasn't come in the original container it was bought in, because we made it. So we need to make sure we label up our homemade plant feeds. Make sure we call it comfrey liquid plant feed, not comfrey tea, because if you go into a health food shop you will find comfrey tea on the shelves, you will find nettle tea on the shelves, and the last thing we want is accidental ingestion of these. So they need to be in a bottle clearly labelled. I brought them out here now, but ideally in a shed, out of the reach of children, vulnerable adults, and definitely not stored in a bowl where dogs could drink out of it and so on. So a good secure lid on the tanks that you're making it in, thinking sensibly about accidental ingestion. So the only other point that you might find is splashing when you're using chemicals. So I don't have here a face mask, but if you are using this, you might actually think it might be handy to put those face masks on so you don't get splashes back onto lips, things like that. But the main thing is label it up well, keep it safe. So we've kept ourselves safe while we were making it, but it is basically a chemical, so we don't want to absorb it through our skin either. So I'm waving my gloves around that I would have worn to harvest my nettles, my comfrey, but actually to use chemicals you want gloves that don't absorb liquids. So make sure you've got some, I'm a medium, but some nitrile or some latex gloves in a size, I'll just throw that at the camera person, in a size that fits, that are comfortable and safe for you to use. And always do apply these, because you do not want to absorb any chemical you use through the skin. Right. And the other thing to think of is not just making sure you don't absorb it through the skin, but that splash idea that I mentioned before. It is a really good idea to actually wear safety glasses and actually safety goggles as well. I find glasses far more comfortable, but when you're thinking of a liquid, it can splash in, so goggles actually protect your eyes from being splashed around. If you don't have goggles to hand, make sure your safety glasses are the wraparound type that do fit round and don't allow splashes to go in. So I'm just going to give a quick demo of making this. The camera person hopefully won't fall over with the smell, because I've already investigated in here. So this was made in April. I've bottled a little bit up of it already. It's a wonder we don't have smell-o-vision. So this is our comfrey, and even with a lid on, look at that. Oh, that is absolutely vile. So, thinking about using this comfrey tea. Look at that. So that's the liquid. Yeah, really smelly, good stuff. You can feel it making the plants grow just from a distance. So, in many of the literature pieces you will read, it suggests you can use comfrey absolutely neat and dilute nettle down. I'm going to have to put the lid back on that. It's pretty horrendous, isn't it, Sheila?
It's disgusting.
Yeah, so that's half a litre there. So if I dilute that 1 to 10 in my watering can, see, I've got my safety goggles on, I'm not getting on my hands, but I can put half a litre in, fill that up, and I will get a really good dilution rate to water with the plants. But thinking of the actual plant feed we've got in there, and the idea we don't want to accidentally consume it, I would suggest you don't use it on salad crops that you're about to eat. Think carefully about what you use it on. I've been using the comfrey tea on my strawberries up to the point that they flowered, because the potassium in it promoted flowers, promoting fruit. But now that the fruit have set, I'm not going to be watering something as smelly as that on top of my strawberry crop. What do you think, Sheila? Best avoided?
Yes, I think the next time we need pegs.
We do need
for our
pegs
noses.
as well.
Oh.
But when you are mixing any chemicals, be it ones you've bought off the shelf, remember to wear protective covering on your eyes. The face shield is ideal. Gloves that don't let you absorb it through the skin as well as that. So there we go. I'm going to go and water a few things with that. And the other thing I definitely don't use it on, house plants. I had a friend that used it on house plants once. That really makes your house smell. But a super feed, Louise showed you how to make that in one of our videos. I was just recapping how to keep yourself safe. Okay, so I think we'll see you another time.